Welcome back to Why Should We Care About African Data Centers, a podcast where we tackle the big questions shaping the industry. I'm Ville Vaklin, and today we are exploring how to choose the right location for a data center. Site selection can make or break a data center's success. It's not just about finding a plot of land, it's about ensuring reliable power, strong connectivity, and security. In Africa, these challenges are amplified by geopolitical instability, economic fluctuations, and infrastructure limitations. In this episode, we'll discuss considerations that influence data center site selection across the continent. We'll hear from the industry leaders about the importance of regulatory environments, accessibility, and how to navigate geopolitical risks. We'll also discuss the importance of security, not just against cyber threats, but also physical security measures. So, whether you are a data center investor, operator, or just curious about the backbone of digital infrastructure, this podcast is for you. Let's get started. Adil El Youssefi is the CEO of Africa Data Centers. I discussed with him the importance of site selection.
You know, the saying goes location, 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 right? I mean, that's really your question makes a lot of sense because that's a very key lever in terms of making sure that the project is successful and value is generated for all for the stakeholders. A data center is basically a real estate environment where we host IT equipment for our customers, and we provide them with other services related to that. And obviously, this entails certain requirements for the facility. The main one is really access to reliable, stable, and hopefully green power. So that's the main criteria across the world, and Africa is no different. The second important criteria is access to connectivity. We were talking about the importance of connectivity. The data halls of a data center are by definition connected because they house information that is consumed by others. And there the criteria is really to have access to reliable, diverse fiber connectivity, because fiber is still the medium that is most suited to ensure that there is enough bandwidth for the amount of data that needs to move in and out of the facility of the data center. The third important criteria is accessibility. A data center is actually a live environment. If you come to one of our facilities, you'll see technicians, you'll see customers, you'll see engineers, and who are coming in and going in a secure manner from the facility. And access is important for these people so that they can access their data, talk with their suppliers, with their stakeholders about their plans. So accessibility is important.
So, accessibility, green power, and connectivity matter. Let's hear more about the access to power and conducive environment.
The other important criteria is really an enabling environment for the facility. So is the regulatory framework conducive for our facilities to operate? Do we have a good business environment for the facility to thrive, and for also its customers to make the right use of it? So this is overall. Now, if we come to the specificities of Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa in particular, obviously some of these requirements are more or less available depending on the locations where we are. In South Africa, for example, where we operate our largest facilities and our largest capacities, unfortunately, we've had challenges like everyone else with availability of power. And there you have to make sure that you have enough sufficient, reliable backup power because a data center facility must be available all the time, right? I mean, we say we need 99.999 availability, but we aim obviously for 100%. So access to power can be challenging, and we've seen as of late significant improvement in the availability of power in South Africa, and we're very hopeful that the trend will continue in the positive direction. Power is also a challenge for us in our West Africa facility, particularly in Nigeria and Lagos. And there, obviously, we look at plans to introduce alternative power, be it solar or be it other means or efficiencies, to make sure that we reduce also our power usage. In our facility in East Africa and Kenya, we're very fortunate to operate within an environment where green power is abundant. There are some statistics out there that say that up to 94 to 96% of the power on the Kenyan grid is green. So that's up there in the top across the world. And we're also looking at expansion facilities to make use of thermal power, for example, geothermal power and such. In terms of access to fiber infrastructure or connectivity infrastructure, that is a must, and across sub-Saharan Africa with operators like Liquid Intelligent Technologies, a sister company of ours, and the Cassava Technologies. We are able to see reliable, sufficient fiber infrastructure across the board. Accessibility is really around selecting the right location for the site and conducive environment. Obviously, African governments recognize, like everywhere else, the need to invest in digital infrastructure, and we're very pleased with what we see across the countries where we operate in on that front.
Sean Versfeld gives a bigger picture about the site selection in Africa, from geopolitics to on-site power generation.
So that's a very good topic, and I think something that a lot of clients are grappling with to a certain degree, and ultimately if you get it wrong, it can go very wrong, and if you can get it right, it goes very well. So it's certainly something that you need to pay critical attention to. As a precursor, I think a lot of the clients, it's all about, time to market. And they suddenly, want to get into market and, there's land available, let's buy it and let's build. And, then you build and then you sit and you wait because, something happened in the region or those type of things. So I think the site selection these days, it's a lot more than just, do we have power available at the site? Do we have water available? Is there connection? I think in Africa, one of the main points these days is geopolitics. And financial institutions and stability of the countries itself. For instance, if you take Nigeria, for example, when was it last year? I think towards the beginning of the year, when there was a change in presidency and change in government and the float of the currency, I think the currency lost, 30 to 35% of its value in one day. So now, you're a client, you've selected your site, you're about to build a DC, you've gone to your board, you've got, $200 million approved. And then the next day the currency devaluates, and now suddenly, you're sitting, 40% under, that can kill ROIs, that can kill business cases and all these type of things. So one critical thing in Africa is definitely geopolitics. I think if we look to South Africa, with the recent change in government or updating government in the GNU, I think things are more stable. If you look to East Africa, Kenya and Uganda, these areas are fairly stable. West Africa, again, can be fairly unstable, again, depending on oil, what's the prices of oil, what's the currencies, all of these type of things. So it's a lot more these days than just, looking at water connectivity. Obviously, connectivity to an ecosystem, connectivity to submarine cables, all of these type of things still play a major part. Power availability itself, that's a big one. I think if we go a bit more in depth in power availability, a lot of our clients these days are say you can't be reliant on a utility anymore. Like we've just discussed, in Africa, utilities are unreliable. Again, some of them, are pretty good, 95% plus availability. Some are not so good. And again, if you're looking at ESG reporting and so on, you're looking at the quality of that electricity that's coming in. Is it coal backed? Is it oil backed? What is it? That a lot of our clients are actually looking at, say, on-site power generation these days to kind of take the authority out of it. So in terms of power availability in terms of site selection, which has really grappled, the entire world in terms of the DC market, is to kind of take it into your hands. And then you can look at some, I wouldn't say greener fuels, but some cleaner fuels like gas, LNG, PNG, these type of things, especially in the West Africa region. But then on the site selection thing, problem, you talk about governments talk, there's this area, there's the suburb, we're going to develop PNG in the next 2 years' time. And they said that 2 years ago, and you look to it now, and there's still nothing developed. So even with these on-site power generation plants, it's all very well building the plant, but if you don't have a viable source to that area, that triggers as you will. So again, referring back to what I mentioned earlier about, say, Terraco building the solar plant, you can take it into your own hands if the country is available to do those things. But it's really a bit more uncertain in Africa compared to, say, EU, where maybe it's a bit more stable. But they've, of course, obviously got their own separate challenges as well.
Sean also talked about tier 1 versus tier 2 markets from a risk-reward perspective.
Again, there's certain operators that play in the tier 1 markets in Africa. And when we look at the tier 1 markets, we'd say looking at South Africa, Kenya, and Nigeria, those are the real tier 1 markets. So then if you look at the tier 2 markets, you're potentially looking at Uganda, Mozambique, Cote d'Ivoire, these type of countries. I think in those tier 2 markets, the tier 2 markets are probably more of the unstable markets. So there's a lot of return for the client there in terms of going into these regions where maybe there's one player existing, two players. So from a business case, it's maybe more open, but there's more risk, say, versus reward there. So going into a tier 2 market is more kind of daunting, you should say. But then again, if you look at the opposite, Nigeria is a tier 1 market, but like we just mentioned, they've got all the issues with the currency and so on. So it's the avoidance is difficult because, again, Nigeria is, I think, a really good case study. There's almost 300 million people living in the country. There's more cell phones. There's people. Everyone wants to be an entrepreneur because the government is maybe not releasing jobs. So there's a massive, growth. There's a massive potential there. But on the flip side, you've got power availability issues. You've got skills issues. You've got trying to import things in there and, trying to get materials in is very, very tricky. So I wouldn't necessarily say that there's anything completely to unavoid. I would just say within Africa, there's better regions and there's others. But if you want to go to certain, you need to really weigh up from a risk-reward perspective.
Clement Martineau from MyX Africa speaks about site selection from a very practical security and physical accessibility point of view.
For data centers, there are also some criteria that you have to stick with. You have to have power, you have to have fiber. So if you're far from power lines, if you're far from connectivity, it's really not going to work, yeah? So that's the first thing. And that is not in Africa, that is all over the world, usually. And then the problem is in Africa, in those developing countries, as soon as you are a few kilometers outside the main cities, you usually don't have good roads, hence you don't have fiber, hence you don't have power. So it restricts you even more to find the right location. You'll be in the US or in France, 40, 50 kilometers out of Paris. You have a beautiful place, a lot of land is available. The fiber, the road will be amazing. Same thing in US, Frankfurt, etc. In Kenya, 50 kilometers after Nairobi, you're really in the Maasai land, in the bush, etc. Yeah. So security could also become a problem because you're storing usually like millions of dollars of equipment. In our case, we have almost $1 million worth of diesel for the backup generators. So that's usually a very attractive currency that people are tempted to steal. Yeah. So security could be a big problem, especially in developing markets. So in Kenya, it's a good example. And lastly, you have to be where your customers want you to be. But, you don't really choose, right? So for my kind of data centers, which is really much co-location data center, commercial data centers, you have to be close to your clients. So most likely near Nairobi, where the eyeballs are. Yeah. So hence that also dictates kind of where you have to be. And the problem in Africa or in Kenya at least is that often all the laws around land, the registries, etc., are not very clear as soon as you're outside the main cities. So it restricts you quite a bit. And lastly, I'd say something that is quite important is, I think I've mentioned that, but the power. as much as you could have power, etc., you need to be quite close to what we call a power substation, where the Kenya Power, in the case of Kenya, is going to step down these high voltage lines, and then you get as close as possible if you can get to those lines, those step down, the better your reliability will be. And the more you are the better you have a good access to power, the less you will have to use your diesel generators. So then it becomes also a sort of a sustainability location. The closer you are to the substation, the less power issues you'll have, the less diesel you will use, the more sustainable and the cheaper you'll be for your ultimate clients.
Yeah, thank you. That was a very thorough explanation. I wanted to touch upon the security question. I was back in last November, I was in Cape Town in the AfricaCom event, and we had this conversation with some of the data center players that I think this was a consultant that was asked when they were building a data center in country X in Africa. I can't remember the country, but like they were asked to make it look not fancy because then if they would place the data center in a place where the surrounding community looks, let's say, less developed, then it instantly kind of puts a sign on their wall saying, hey, here's something expensive. So they kind of, I think they were throwing some kind of garbage next to the data center, kind of tires and stuff like that to make it look more down to earth.
I mean, each country in Africa are a bit different. South Africa is quite particular, but we are still a sort of a premium business. So actually, going again on how do I choose the location, you have to be somehow premium, I'd say, because if you want to attract local banks, local SMEs, etc., if you're really on the third or fourth road, there's no tarmac road, etc., it doesn't bring the premium look and feel that you want to attract. Those clients are paying top dollars to get to a data centers. So having tires and garbage and kiosks on the side of the road, the kibondas as we call that in Kenya, doesn't really look so attractive, especially for the local market. But then if you try to attract the Googles, Microsoft, Oracle, etc. of the world that are in very developed economies, and you take them to very bad neighborhoods, it could also look pretty bad. And then I think the few tires if it looks bad on the externals, you still have to protect yourself with big walls, razor wire, electrical fence, security. We have dogs at night. We have armed police during the day. Wherever you are, at the end of the day, you have to beef up your security quite hard.
Yeah, because that's at the end of the day your business.
that's a bit security, power, cooling, and real estate.
Yeah, exactly. How does site selection then potentially improve data center sustainability?
And that goes back to potentially your first question. If you have already a good location, meaning you have a good grid, meaning you have a reliable power from the utility, you will use very little diesel, because the diesel that is burned by the generators when you have a downtime from your utility is what usually creates smoke, CO2, etc. So if you are very close to a good substation that is reliable, that you have a good uptime from the utility, you don't consume petrol or diesel or gas depending on your backup. Hence, you're already quite sustainable. And then two, of course, data centers is all about cooling, right? There's something you cannot reduce is the energy that is consumed by your clients. If a client brings to you machines, servers, equipment that are consuming X kilowatt, they would consume exactly the same X kilowatt in any other data centers in the world. What could make a difference is how you cool them down. So in those good old times, 10, 15, 20 years ago, for 1 kilowatt server, or for a server that was consuming 1, you will have 1-ish of cooling. Nowadays, you have one server, the server is still consuming 1 kilowatt, and you have 0.2, 0.3 kilowatt of cooling. So that's what we call the PUE. So the better you PUE, the more attractive you are to your clients, the more sustainable you are, and the less energy you consume, so the more sustainable you are in general.
Choosing a data center location is about more than land. It's about reliable power, strong connectivity, and a stable environment. proximity to power sources, diverse network routes, and secure, well-regulated conditions all ensure smooth operations. Beyond infrastructure, market conditions also matter. The balance between Tier 1 and Tier 2 markets, geopolitical stability, and clear land regulations influence investment. A business-friendly environment is key. In our next episode, we'll explore what's driving demand for Africa's data center market. See you then.
This podcast is part of the Data Governance in Africa initiative, helping the African Union shape data policies, enable cross-border data flows, and build secure, sustainable digital infrastructure. Funded by the EU and 5 member states, it supports a unified digital market in Africa.